Today I'm outside Warwickshire headquarters, Leamington, where I'm here to meet with Superintendent David Gardner, who has kindly agreed to meet with us and give us an interview following on from the incident at Warwick and Leamington Gurdwara on Sunday. I'm at Leamington Police Station with Superintendent David Gardner, who has kindly agreed to speak to us about the events outside Warwick and Leamington Gurdwara on Sunday afternoon, which apparently started quite early Sunday morning. Officer Gardner, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Unfortunately, on Sunday, your constabulary were called to the Warwick and Leamington Gurdwara. Can you give us some more information about what it was that led to you receiving that call?
Yes, certainly. In the early hours of Sunday morning, so just before 7 o'clock, our police control room received a call that a large number of individuals had forced their way into the temple with their faces covered and with weapons. So our control room here then assessed that call and deployed quite a significant number of resources immediately to the temple in order to bring that situation under control, because at that point we didn't understand what it was we were dealing with.
When you say faces covered with weapons, did you understand those to be offensive weapons or part of the Sikh faith, the Gurban that Sikhs carry? Yeah,
I mean, at that point, bearing in mind quite often with incidents like this, events move very quickly and individuals have to make decisions based on the information they've got in front of them at that moment in time. Those initial calls to us talked about individuals with weapons, large numbers, and individuals with their faces covered. So clearly our control room take the view that something fairly significant is happening here at the time, and so need to deploy officers to that quite quickly. Which they did to make sure that we keep people safe and we make sure no one's getting hurt at that location. Because at that point, clearly, we didn't understand what the intention of those individuals were or what was about to happen following that initial call to us.
Can you tell us what time that call was received approximately?
It was just before 7 o'clock in the morning.
Right. And you say these gentlemen had forced their way onto the premises?
Yeah, I mean, at that point of the call to us, all we get is a number of calls from people saying, that's right, yeah, telling us what's going on at the time. And it was clearly quite a distressing incident was going on, an incident that was causing quite a bit of alarm and concern. And an incident involved a lot of people. And so, yes, weapons were talked about as part of that call, and we need to respond in a way that means we can deal with whatever we find when we get there. Because that might be there aren't any weapons, it might be people who've got very significant weapons, and we need to be in a position when we arrive to be able to deal with whatever we're faced with.
Can you provide me with more details? I mean, you've said that you received more than one call. Was it from the congregation? Was it from other third parties, external bodies?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding at the moment is because so many people were involved, clearly it's a main community location. Mm-hmm. Events like this tend to trigger quite a few calls from members of the public who see what's going on. So I believe our first call was from people who were immediately outside that venue into our control room. So yes, certainly a number of calls were received by our control room.
Right. Once the initial threat assessment was made and you deployed your officers to the scene, I note that your officers were there for many, many hours to contain the situation. Can you please give us more information as to what went on when you arrived at the scene?
Yeah, I mean, clearly, as we've already talked about, on our first attendance, our priority is making sure we're protecting people and that nobody's getting hurt. And until we get there, we don't really understand fully what's going on. But we've clearly got quite a distressing incident underway. When officers arrive, as we do with any incident, we make an assessment about what's going on and what the appropriate course of action is. And our objective then really was to make sure this incident is resolved peacefully and without anybody getting hurt. And yes, that took quite a few hours on Sunday to get to that point, but I'm pleased to say it did get resolved without any injuries or without any further disruption or disorder. So quite often it's worth us investing that amount of time to bring incidents to a resolution in a peaceful and calm way.
Am I right in believing that armed police were on attendance at the scene?
Yeah, part of that initial deployment was armed officers. And again, when we're making those initial assessments, you talk about large numbers of people, faces covered with weapons. At that point, we don't know fully what they are. It would be our normal practice to deploy firearms officers following a proper process and proper assessment. But we would deploy firearms officers to make sure we're able to deal with whatever we're faced with when we arrive. Because clearly at that moment in time, we didn't know what the intention was of that group of people or what the harm might be to others in the community at the time.
Okay. Now, the gentleman involved would say it was a peaceful protest. Yeah. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, it is now a live investigation, so I wouldn't want to discuss in any huge detail the allegations that have been made and the investigations that's ongoing. But there is now a really open and independent investigation by our CID team into what happened. So we really get to understand what bits of it were peaceful, what bits of it weren't. But it is quite clear that during the initial stages of that incident, a lot of alarm, a lot of distress was caused in that community, which takes it beyond what we would normally consider to be peaceful protest.
Right. Now, the sort of knowledge and training of the officers of the Warwickshire Constabulary, would you say they're au fait and understand Sikhism and the faith?
Yeah, broadly speaking, awareness is really very good across the police officers as a whole. Certainly our local Safer Neighbourhood team have regular interactions with the temple and have got a really good understanding of the faith and how they need to interact.
And what is your response to allegations of disrespect to the Sikh articles of faith? Because from what I've heard and seen in other media, most of what was seized was actually the Gurban, which is lawful and legal, and all Sikhs have a right to carry it on their person.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm aware of some of that social media material. We need to be really, really clear that these individuals weren't arrested because they were carrying those items. Yes, we have seized as part of that investigation, but we'll be looking to return those as quickly as we possibly can. But at the moment, we've got a number of allegations. We've got clearly a fairly large-scale incident that took place on Sunday morning, and we need to do a thorough investigation and make sure we get to the bottom of exactly what did happen. And we will move as quickly as we can through that, and we'll make sure people get items back as quickly as we possibly can.
Fantastic. We've had some reports regarding poor treatment received at the hands of the police. Can you comment on that?
I'm not personally aware of any particular allegations. I was there on Sunday myself and wasn't aware of anything. As I say, we took many, many hours in dealing with the incident for that real reason, really, to make sure we've treated everybody fairly, we've treated everybody with that dignity and respect, and that we've given people time to work through the issues and get to a peaceful resolution. So I'm really content that, yes, our initial response was what it had to be to deal with what was reported. But once we understood what was going on, we were very slow and methodical in the way we dealt with it to make sure that everyone's needs were considered. Clearly, if there is anybody who feels they were dealt with incorrectly, we're more than happy to hear that, and I'll make sure those issues are looked into.
Now, I understand when I arrived on the scene, which was just after 2 p.m, there was actually Leicestershire Constabulary there as well. So you'd gone to sister forces to get their support. So that was sort of the scale of the incident in your eyes.
Yeah, that's right. And we have to remember we're talking about 55 people here, which is a lot of people for the police to deal with. And we have some pretty well-practiced routine methods of using officers from neighbouring forces. That process is followed quite regularly for a whole range of different events. And so it's not unusual that we would do that for an event of this scale. And those officers would have been on their way and coming from what's fairly short distances across to us here in Warwickshire to provide that support.
Okay. Now, in terms of the gentlemen involved in this particular incident, were they cooperative?
We managed to resolve it peacefully, so all 55 individuals were arrested without any further disorder or issue. So we brought it to a resolution with the cooperation of everybody involved, yes.
Right, okay. Because we were led to believe that they'd actually arrived at the Gurdwara and they were, although they had their faces covered, they were actually seated and praying.
That's what we're investigating at the moment. Our initial response that wasn't the tone we were dealing with. We were dealing with what was quite clearly a large number of individuals forcing their way into a temple. Clearly, our investigation will get to the bottom of what that looked like and what that involved. But our response was to deal with that, and that's what the officers were faced with when they arrived.
I keep hearing the term force their way in. The Gurdwara is a community place. It's a place of worship for Sikhs. These gentlemen were clearly Sikhs, and one would say they had a right to be there. Somebody obviously made the judgment and the call that they were not welcome. I'm just trying to sort of get our heads round why they would not be welcome, because within a Sikh Gurdwara, everyone is welcome. We're all welcome, irrespective of colour, creed. But in this particular instance, they were actually Sikh men.
Yes. And that's that dividing line really between peaceful, lawful protest. And we have in the past facilitated peaceful, lawful protest at that location, and I'm sure we will do again in the future. The dividing line is when that becomes behaviour that causes other people to be significantly alarmed and distressed, and that's what we were faced with on this occasion. So we're talking about a level of intimidation of those around them that caused quite significant fear, and it was quite clear from the calls we had that that fear was being felt by quite a lot of people in the area and within that community at the time. And that for me is the dividing line between whether somebody's, as you say, just walking freely into a building they're entitled to be in, or whether we've got a level of force and a level of behaviour. That means when you take all of those circumstances as a whole, reasonable people would be quite scared and quite intimidated by what was going on. And that was what we were faced with in the very early stages of this incident on Sunday morning. And we will now work our way through a number of potential criminal allegations that have been made as part of that. And in the fullness of time, we'll understand exactly what did go on.
So if you were to be advising any like-minded individual out there that wanted to hold a peaceful protest, what would you say are the boundaries of a peaceful protest? Yeah,
I mean, peaceful protest is an area that British policing is really good at, and it's something that British policing facilitates and supports across the country all the time. And it's something, I say, we have done regularly within this force as well. And quite often we encourage people to engage with us as part of that in advance, because we will help, and we will help facilitate it where it's lawful and peaceful. And it prevents this lack of clarity around what was going on, because you have to appreciate in the early stages of this incident, nobody knew what this was going to be. Nobody knew this was a peaceful protest. It was large numbers of people looking fairly intimidating and threatening, entering a building en masse. And if we have that early engagement with people and we understand what people's plans are, we're able to help and support and make sure that these events are peaceful and within the law. So I would always encourage people to engage with us in advance, and we can certainly help facilitate that. Clearly they don't have to, and if they don't want to, that's fine as well, but people need to be aware of what their behaviours are perceived as, what their behaviours will have an impact on in terms of the local community, and make sure it's within those boundaries of the law.
Okay. Now, the other thing that sort of comes to mind is, in this particular Gurdwara, I understand the incident was around interfaith marriage. Am I correct in believing that?
That's my understanding, yes.
Right. And there was a wedding that was scheduled to take place on Sunday?
That's my understanding, yeah.
And did that wedding take place?
I'm not entirely sure, to be fair. I believe it did, but the temple will probably be able to advise you better. But my understanding is it did go ahead, yes.
And is this the first incident at this particular Gurdwara, or have you had to attend other incidents before?
No, there's been other incidents in the past as well. All of the previous ones have been peaceful, and we've always helped facilitate and enable those events. So the incidents of Sunday morning just gone was on a different scale and a different style to how these things have been dealt with in the past.
Right, okay. Because when I arrived, there was probably a congregation of about 35 Sikh males, all under the Nishan Sahib, which is the saffron flag that flies in front of every Sikh building. But by the end of the incident, by the time we left, there was probably a handful of them there. And it was evident that they had been arrested and taken away. Going forward, as I say, you say it's all pending and investigations are currently pending. How quickly can these gentlemen reasonably expect their articles of faith back?
I can't say that at the moment. Our commitment now is to be really proportionate and balanced in our approach now. So we will investigate, we will get so we understand exactly what did go on. And we'll be completely impartial and based on the facts and the evidence in doing that. And we'll move through that investigation as quickly as we can, and we won't keep anyone's belongings any longer than necessary. So we'll be looking to release those items as quickly as we possibly can.
And in terms of working with the Sikh community in the Warwickshire area, what will you be doing hereafter to sort of lessons learned from this weekend and how things should be dealt with in the future?
Yeah, well, prior to this, for many years, we have regular community meetings and we have regular interaction. So our relationships with the Sikh community are very good within Leamington anyway. We'll make sure those continue into the future. We've had lots of meetings since Sunday already, and we'll be continuing to do that. And certainly we'll be looking to make sure that where there is protests in the future, we have that opportunity of early engagement and we help people to do them without any unnecessary disruption.
Mainstream media have actually reported that it was gang-like behaviour and these gentlemen were wielding their swords and everybody was under attack. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's part of our investigation now, to understand what weapons were used, how they were used, if they were used, and really get to the bottom of the actual facts of this incident. And once we've done that, we'll clearly be able to demonstrate that and come and give more information on it. What I would say, though, is that during the early stages of a spontaneous, fast-moving incident like this, when you've got large numbers of people with face coverings on, forcing their way into a building, people will take a perception from that, and people will talk to the media, and people will make comment on it. And some of the terminology that's been used in the media may or may not be factually correct once we've finished our investigation. But certainly you can understand why those perceptions are out there, because 55 people moving into a building by force with face coverings on, it will have that perception. And so our investigation will be impartial, we'll look at the facts, and we'll get to the bottom of exactly what did happen, what weapons were used, if they were used, and be able to give more clarity once we've concluded that.
I think it'd be fair for me as a Sikh person to say that the Sikh community is quite shocked and quite distraught. The other media have portrayed almost us as terrorists, if you will. With the behaviour for armed police to be there, I think, at a place of worship has sort of sent a real vibe, a negative vibe through the Sikh community up and down the country and internationally too. I mean, Sikhism is a humanitarian faith. All Sikhs it's a humanistic faith where we seek world peace, Chardi Kala for all. And that's what we practice and that's what we're taught. And we have our living Guru, the Sri Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, and we abide by those rules. And as I say, Sikhs will be found in every profession today across the United Kingdom. And we are, as a whole, law-abiding citizens. And my understanding is some of those gentlemen that have been arrested are actually professionals. But my concern is, after 9/11 attacks in New York, the first person that was murdered after that was a Sikh person, obviously a case of mistaken identity. 7/7 in London, the first place of worship to be attacked was a Sikh Gurdwara in Kent. So are Sikhs being confused with Islamic terrorists, and are we being tarnished with the same brush?
Well, certainly from the police's perspective, we are making sure that we work with all the communities within Warwickshire to make sure that we've got good relationships, we understand the pressures, we understand the concerns and the fears within lots of different communities across Warwickshire. And we've got a really good Safer Neighbourhood team policing structure across the county, and they have those really good relationships on a local level. I think this incident, though, is different. This incident is something that is quite isolated in nature. But we had to deal with it in the way we dealt with it because of its scale, because of the impact it had on the community there at that time on that morning. And so we shouldn't confuse the two issues, I don't think. Mm-hmm. The police will always need to respond to what's reported to it. We will always need to respond to deal with the incidents as they come into us. And until we fully understand the incident, we have to make sure we're able to deal with all eventualities. And certainly in this case, we can't get away from the fact large numbers of people using force to get into a building raises our alarm bells. It has to, and we have to be able to respond to that to make sure people are safe. And yes, once we understand people are there peacefully, then our tactics can change and we can deal with it differently, which is what we did on Sunday, which is why it took quite a few hours to then resolve.
Thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. I understand it is an ongoing investigation, so you are limited to what you can tell me. And I respect that. And I respect the fact that you have a public duty to look after the public, and you have to respond in the way you see fit.
Yeah, and I would just encourage people really to understand that we are impartial as well, and our role is to really understand the facts of what's gone on and to be proportionate in what we do. I think the community should be reassured that we're able to respond in the numbers that we did on Sunday morning, because if it had have been a very sinister incident of some sort, we were there and we were able to contain it and deal with it. And people should now feel reassured that we will deal with it in a really proportionate and a really methodical way to understand what did go on and then take appropriate action based on the actual facts. So this is now part of a slower and balanced approach that we're adopting.
So the interfaith marriage issue really is an issue for the Sikh community, and
yeah, I mean, we'll do what we can in terms of helping prevent incidents like this and talking to any particular groups that we can to help prevent incidents like this. But yeah, the actual resolution of the interfaith marriage is an issue within the Sikh community to get to a solution.
Mm-hmm. So going forward, your advice as the police would be, if you want to protest, get in touch with the police first and do it properly.
That's right, yes. And be very aware, if you choose not to get involved with us, how things are perceived and what impact you're having on a community when you do it, because you need to make sure it's peaceful, you need to make sure it's lawful, and that's the responsibility on all of us, isn't it, in the community, to make sure we're doing that all of the time.
Superintendent Gardner, thank you very much for your time.